Margaret Hayes had lived in the quiet suburban town of Willow Creek for nearly 2 decades. At 43 years old, she had grown used to the rhythms of her neighborhood, the morning joggers passing her porch, the distant bark of dogs, the familiar rumble of delivery vans weaving through the cul-de-sac. Life had settled into something steady, maybe too steady, since her divorce 5 years earlier. She worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, often tucked away in her upstairs office, staring at glowing screens while sipping lukewarm coffee. She told herself she didn't miss the excitement she once longed for, but deep down she felt the quiet ache of days blending into one another. Her son, Daniel, was away at college in Boston, and though they spoke often, the house still felt too silent when she set 2 plates on the table out of habit, only to push one back into the cabinet. On a gray Tuesday afternoon, the sound of tires crunching over the gravel driveway pulled her out of her thoughts. She expected the usual middle-aged delivery guy who had been dropping off her packages for years, a man who always wore mirrored sunglasses and barely spoke more than a sign here. But when she opened the door, it wasn't him. A boy stood there. Not really a boy, she corrected herself, but young, much younger than she expected. Early 20s, maybe 19 at most. He had short dark hair dampened from the misting rain outside, a baseball cap turned backwards, and a brown uniform jacket that seemed one size too large for him. His eyes caught her attention first. Bright, sharp, and strangely familiar, though she couldn't place why. "Package for Hayes?" he asked, his voice light but steady. "That's me," Margaret said, signing the tablet he held out. Her fingers brushed his accidentally, and she felt a strange jolt. Not attraction, not quite, but something startling, as though the touch carried a memory she couldn't recall. The boy smiled politely, handed her the box, and turned to leave. But before he reached the driveway, he glanced back at her house again, his gaze lingering a second longer than it should have. Margaret stood frozen by the door, wondering why his look unsettled her so deeply. Over the next week, the deliveries kept coming. Margaret ordered more than she needed: books, kitchen gadgets, even a pair of boots she knew she would probably return, just to see if the young driver would show up again. He always did. Each time he arrived, she noticed little details: the way his hands trembled slightly when he held out the tablet, the way his eyes scanned the family photos in her hallway if she left the door open too long, the way his smile seemed both eager and nervous. One afternoon, after setting the box inside, Margaret finally asked, "You're new, right? I don't think I've seen you on this route before." He hesitated, then said, "Yeah, I started a couple weeks ago. Just filling in for another driver." "What's your name?" she asked. "Ethan," he replied, and again that flicker of recognition tugged at her. The name struck a chord, but she couldn't place why. Margaret nodded politely, but after he left, she sat at her kitchen table staring at the package without opening it. "Ethan." She whispered it under her breath. Why did it sound like an echo from her past? Days later, the rain returned, heavier this time, drumming against the windows in a steady rhythm. Margaret had just finished a video call with a client when the doorbell rang. She hurried downstairs, expecting another package. But when she opened the door, Ethan stood there without a box. He was drenched, water dripping from the brim of his cap. "Sorry," he said quickly. "I'm not here for a delivery. My van broke down at the end of your street. I don't have my phone on me, and you were the only house with the lights on. Could I maybe call the depot from here?" Margaret blinked, taken aback, but then stepped aside. "Of course, come in." He entered cautiously, removing his cap and running a hand through his wet hair. For the first time, she saw his face fully, without shadows or distractions. And in that instant, she felt her stomach drop. His eyes, his cheekbones, even the small scar above his left eyebrow, it all clicked into place. He looked almost exactly like her high school boyfriend, Michael Carter. Michael had been her first love, the boy who drove her to prom, the one who promised to write to her when he left for the Navy and never did. Michael, who she later discovered had died in a car accident years ago. Margaret stared at Ethan, her pulse racing. He wasn't just vaguely familiar. He was nearly a mirror of Michael at 17. She handed him her phone with a trembling hand. While he dialed, she sank into a chair, trying to steady herself. It couldn't be. The resemblance was uncanny, yes, but people resembled others all the time. Still, as Ethan thanked her and hung up, she couldn't shake the sensation that the past had just walked into her kitchen. "Are you okay, ma'am?" he asked, noticing her pale face. "I'm fine," she lied quickly. Then, unable to stop herself, she blurted out, "Do you know anyone named Michael Carter?" Ethan froze. His eyes widened just slightly before he masked it with a shrug. "Why do you ask?" Margaret swallowed hard. "You just remind me of someone I used to know." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then Ethan said quietly, "Michael Carter was my father." The words hit her like a thunderclap. Margaret's chest tightened, and she gripped the edge of the table. Michael Carter. His father. Which meant, she stared at Ethan, her voice barely audible. "But your father, Michael, he's gone. He died." Ethan nodded, looking down.
"Yeah.
"Before I was even born. My mom never talked about him much. Just said he was a good man who made mistakes, and that he passed away young. I never even saw a photo of him." Margaret's eyes welled with tears. She rose from her chair, walked to the old drawer in her hallway, and pulled out a faded shoebox. Inside, wrapped in tissue, were a handful of photographs she hadn't looked at in years. She pulled out one, a snapshot of her and Michael at a summer fair, his arms slung around her shoulders, both of them laughing. When she showed it to Ethan, his face went pale. "That's him," he whispered. "That's my dad." Margaret felt her knees weaken. She had spent decades burying her memories of Michael, telling herself it was just youthful love that ended too soon. But standing before her was the living proof of him, his son. And in that moment, Margaret knew her life was about to change in ways she couldn't have imagined.